Nine Newspapers has sent a large cohort of journalists to cover the Olympics in Paris, while the company has spent hundreds of millions of dollars securing rights and licensing. But the moment has been overshadowed by strikes as staff ask for a 20% pay rise over 3 years, at a time that the business has been plagued by dwindling share prices and mass redundancies. It is unclear how much this will impact Olympics coverage, but there are reports that a fairly large group of journalists who are on an all-expense-paid trip to Paris could strike in solidarity. News.com.au reports Nine Chief Executive Officer Mike Sneesby has told staff he is profoundly disappointed after almost all journalists working for the company's newspapers voted for a 5-day strike on the eve of the 2024 Olympic Games opening ceremony, including 20 reporters on the ground in Paris. Now, The Guardian has also reported that some other staff in Paris who are not striking are disgruntled that their colleagues will down tools. And they have every right to be angry because there are some serious stories happening in Paris which involve Australians.
2 Channel 9 tech workers were assaulted during an attempted robbery in the northeastern suburbs of Paris, but escaped injury. And police are investigating claims that an Australian woman was raped by 5 men 24 hours earlier in the French capital.
Journalists assaulted and a woman gang raped by 5 people left to cower in a kebab shop with her clothes all ripped up.
The famous lights of Paris's party district, so close to the iconic Moulin Rouge, the scene of a horror story for a young Australian woman. It ended in this kebab shop. We won't identify her, but the 25-year-old fled here, visibly distressed on CCTV and in tears.
To think that any journalist would down tools over a pay dispute in the days following that CCTV footage surfacing is simply astounding. Well, Sophie, let's bring you in here. Obviously, this is another headache for CEO Mike Sneesby, who's had a lot on his plate, but they've spent hundreds of millions of dollars on these rights, and now they've got reports saying up to 20, maybe even more journalists who are in Paris. I mean, what a privilege, with all of these stories going on around that Australians want to know about, who are saying that they're not going to cover it. What's your response to this?
So this morning I was down at Nine's headquarters in the Docklands in Melbourne with many staff walking out the job. They are now on a 5-day strike. They, as you said, Jack, want a 20% pay increase over the next 3 years. Management have come back and offered them 10.5%. They are not happy with this. So this could not have come at a worse time for them when their CEO, Mr. Sneesby, is in Paris. And he's also caused a lot of angst amongst staff because earlier in the week, The Australian reported that he was running through the French streets carrying the Olympic torch in the torch relay. And they're saying this was a tone-deaf message. So the staff at Nine's publishing division that this impacts includes the Sydney Morning Herald, The Age, the Australian Financial Review and several other online publications. They have a heavily unionised workforce in their publishing division, and hundreds of them have walked off the job and will be downing tools for 5 days, unable to reach a satisfactory agreement to their liking with management.
Yeah, Oliver, you're part of the broader Nine family, not Nine Newspapers, obviously, so this probably won't impact you and your direct colleagues. But what's the reaction in the company to this news?
Yeah, as you say, I do work for Nine. Obviously, Radio 6PR is part of the Nine Entertainment company. And obviously, whereas probably as shocked, I suppose, or surprised as seeing that unfortunately these measures have to be taken. As Sophie said, it is a very unionised workforce there in the publishing division. It's up to 80 or 90% of staff which are downing tools, and I just hope it's obviously resolved as soon as possible for all parties involved. It just highlights obviously this cost of living crisis that many Australians are feeling, and journalists are not immune from that. And obviously we're seeing the pressure that is on all media businesses across not just Australia but right around the world. The industry's going through a transitional phase, and we're obviously all on the front line of that as working journalists, as the three of us are. So, look, I personally obviously hope that there's a resolution for everybody, that we can see the wonderful coverage of the Olympics, of course, because as Sophie said, Nine's invested a lot of money into the Olympics coverage across obviously broadcast, television, radio and the newspaper division. And, we obviously want to see and celebrate and bask in all the glory. So let's hope that there's a decision sooner rather than later for everybody involved.
Yeah, let's see. We'll keep an eye on it, definitely. Let's move on now, because politicians in Australia have finally discovered deep fake technology, and it has led to some wild moments. Queensland Premier Stephen Miles was outraged when this AI video of him dancing was published by the LNP.
It looks like a video of the Premier, but it's not. This clip, posted on the Liberal National Party's TikTok account, has been created using artificial intelligence.
This individual video might be harmless enough, but I think it represents a turning point for our democracy. It's a pretty dangerous turning point.
Dangerous to democracy. I don't know about that, but it certainly is childish politics. But Miles only has himself to blame. The man publishes some of the weirdest content to his social media pages, like this video promoting a reduction to car registration payments. Honestly, it's hard to know which video is supposed to be the deepfake hit job. They both make him look ridiculous. And while Miles says the process of making a deepfake against your political opponent is dangerous to democracy, it turns out his federal Labor counterparts had done the same thing to Peter Dutton just weeks ago. Sophie, I think you've got to be really careful when you're a politician. You take this moral point of outrage to make sure that your own side of politics hasn't done the exact same thing. It's a bit embarrassing for Stephen Miles and his team.
Well, I think, Jack, people realise when they're looking online now, there is a lot of fake imagery and video content, photos and so forth. So I think people are wary of it, but sometimes it is hard to work out what is real and what is not. As it being a threat to democracy, I think that's arguable, but obviously they are in full election mode there in Queensland, and Stephen Miles is in trouble in the polls, so he obviously wants to make sure his messaging is put out there as positive as possible, and when his opponents are putting out this video sort of content that mocks him, it's obviously damaging to his prospects to win the next election.
Yeah, it's a good point. Oliver, I guess another way of looking at it is Stephen Miles is using editing technology to make it look like he's part of the Fast and Furious. You could make an argument it's satirising him and it's satirising these ridiculous, posts on social media. Was it too far? Have people crossed a line going down this path?
Look, it blurs the lines, doesn't it? As Sophie indicated there, it's getting harder and harder to determine what is perhaps real and what might be, manufactured or manipulated. But, there was a little meme doing the rounds, a little reel doing the rounds of supposedly Joe Biden sitting in the presidential office during the week and swearing and cursing and saying goodbye. And I had a bit of a chuckle at that. You knew that was not real. But the question is, really, here, Jack, do our politicians want to actually be politicians? Do they want to legislate? Do they want to worry about the people they represent? Or do they want to be social media influencers? Because increasingly
Exactly.
you're finding, particularly premiers, and Stephen Miles is the most petty of them all, they want to control the narrative on their social media pages. In that clip you played before, he looks like a goose. I mean, he's trying to, adopt that social media presence ultimately to appeal to the younger voters, which, fine. They want to try and remain relevant with, obviously, the next generation of Queenslanders or West Australians or whoever it might be, wherever you are. But they've got to sit back and look at this. Are they trying to be an influencer? Are they trying to be a comedian? Or are they trying to be a leader? So of all the problems and all the issues in Queensland right now, the fact that Stephen Miles has wasted so much energy this week on that deep fake really shows that he is trying to cling on to absolutely anything to just try and not lose as many seats as possible when Queensland goes to the election later this year.
Well said. Oliver, Sophie, thank you so much for joining me.